So this video is going to be me going through the old like original Castoff drafts and seeing what there is to see, I suppose. I'm gonna be doing kind of a dramatic reading, I suppose, and I have not opened this document since 2011. At the time of recording this, it is 2018. I have no idea what we're gonna find in here, so here we go. By the way, thank you to everyone on Patreon for sponsoring this horrible look into my, how old was I, 19-year-old psyche? Woo. Let's do this shit. Alright, crack this puppy open. Starting with chapter 1. Mary Ann Jacobs lived alone. You will notice the name has changed since the original draft. I don't know why I changed it. Maybe I just forgot. Mary Ann Jacobs lived alone. At least, that's what she told people. She told them this because in reality, she was living with a monster. And you guys, I was so fucking proud of that first line. This is the strong beginning hook that my story needs. Huzzah! So if I remember correctly, the first chapter or the first couple chapters are really like pretty similar to how it plays out in the current comic version. So yeah, it was early afternoon on a cool autumn day. Miss Jacobs hurriedly ran through the list of supplies on the slightly crumpled paper in her hands, noting things she had already written down and scrambling for a pencil so she could write down what she was missing. So we've got some Miss Jacobs action in here. She runs around talking about the shop. Petal Grove Bookshop was not in the best condition. A small front room was lined floor to ceiling in bookshelves of different sizes, filled to the brim with books of all thicknesses and colors. You know, like books are. Small windows at the front of the shop let in natural sunlight, which illuminated the floors and bounced lightly off the many particles of dust floating in the air. That's actually not a bad line, I don't think. I don't know. This was my first attempt at writing anything. A ladder was propped up against one of the walls to allow access to the higher shelves. A heavy wooden cashier's desk was situated toward the back of the room, covered in even more books that didn't fit on the shelves. The old wood floors were covered in countless piles of even more books that wouldn't fit onto the desk or the shelves, some stacked neatly and others thrown in messy piles. The shop was literally overflowing with knowledge, yet hardly anyone ever stopped by. In the very back of the shop, hidden beyond the cashier's desk and away from the light, was a small door. The store usually remained closed and locked during the day, but today it stood slightly ajar, letting in the smallest possible amount of light. Behind it was a small bedroom, shrouded almost entirely in darkness. So in this original draft, the shop had two rooms. The front room where the store was, and the back room was the bedroom that they shared, like Jacobs and Vector. I gave them a hallway in the actual comic because I felt like it made more sense for there to be more than two rooms in this store. The only light came from the small crack in the doorway, a few sunbeams from between the curtains of the window, and a pair of glowing yellow eyes. Here's my boy! Here comes my boy! Why are you making so much noise this early in the morning? Vector asked groggily. He stood in the shadows beyond the slightly open door, rubbing his glowing eyes against his sleeve. First of all, ow, that implies that he's got his eyes open and his sleeve is just like, oh, I gotta polish my eyeball. That's healthy. So then they have like a conversation. You were up all night reading again, weren't you? That survived to the current draft. I took out some of this banter for time. He says, maybe. Miss Jacobs shot an accusing look towards the back door. Yeah, I was. Not all night, though, just until about 4 in the morning. I went to sleep right after that, though. Okay, and then she chastises him, saying he's going to go blind. You should note that I did not describe my boy at all, except to say he has glowing eyes, which are now super shiny from all the sleeve polishing. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. Okay then, Mr. Smarty Pants, she replied in challenging tone. Where are those religious texts, Father Miller? Oh, Miller! Oh, I forgot, I changed his name, so this is Father Marshall in the original story, because I literally just forgot his name, couldn't remember what it was, made something up off the top of my head. That's how writers do it, I guess. Without looking, Vector immediately knew the answer. Third shelf from the bottom on the bookshelf directly behind that, to the right of the front door. Jacobs walked to the front of the shop and was able to find the book she was looking for exactly where Vector had specified. What about the shop keys? Bottom of the pile on the right of your desk. My coffee? You drank it already. My to-do list? It's in your hand. So I wish I had been able to keep more of this in here because the idea is that Vector spends so much time in this shop with no one else around, he literally knows where everything is. Because what else is a boy to do when you have nothing else to do? But yeah, so she chastises him. It's like, okay, if you're done showing off, I'm going out. She tells him to clean up. I guess I can organize a bit, but I thought you didn't like me going out into the front room, Vector asked nervously. I mean, what if someone looks through the window and sees me? I'll draw the curtains, it'll be fine. I don't think we're going to have any customers today anyway. Jacob slung the large bag over his shoulder as she shut the curtains at the front of the shop. Light shimmered through the thin white fabric, but it was impossible to see inside the shop while the curtains were drawn. Jacobs turned once more towards the back of the shop, suddenly serious. If anyone tries to break in, just hide in the usual spot until I get back, and don't risk showing yourself to anyone who might get in. Did she lock the door? Hey Jacobs, did you lock the door? Let's find out, because I don't remember if she actually locks the door in this. Oh no, yeah, that's what happens, is she talks about, don't worry if someone gets in, and then doesn't lock the door because, like, a piece of paper gets blown out of her hand. And then she runs off, and she forgot to turn the sign to closed. That's what happened. She didn't lock the door, and she forgot to change the sign to closed. That changed it a little bit in the comic. She's smart enough to remember to lock the door, at least. So then we talk about my boy here. Vector changed out of his night clothes and started tidying the front room. His eyes were only glowing slightly now, casting a very slight yellow light over his face. He stared at the light coming through the thin curtains, his eyes adjusting to the sun. A loose, cream-colored undershirt was rolled up and bunched around his elbows, with the sleeveless brown tunic wore over it. The brown belt around his waist was cinched tightly, and loose pants were draped over his long, skinny legs. His clothes hung off his bony frame very loosely, and he had to constantly adjust them to make sure they fit right and didn't fall off. The idea is that all of his clothes were Miss Jacobs' clothes, and he just kind of repurposed them. That's why none of his clothes fit right. His black, wiry hair stuck up in all directions and was long enough to reach between his shoulder blades if it ever lay flat. That's still the same. His coffee brown skin, 2 sets of pointed fangs, and glowing yellow eyes complemented his unusual appearance. In fact, he would have looked fairly intimidating if it weren't for his poor posture. He walked with a constant slouch like he was trying to use his shoulders as a shield. His yellow eyes were opened very wide, darting around in a nervous manner, and his hands were constantly moving between playing with his hair and fiddling with his sleeves. He looked as though he expected something to jump out at him if he ever lowered his guard. He moved around the room in short bursts, picking up several books in time and scurrying to put them in their proper place. He was a walking ball of anxious neurosis, and I was proud of that line too! Ha! I don't think I even mentioned his ears in here. Nope, I didn't. He's got long pointy ears, and I literally never mention it. Good job, me. To top it all off, Vector was afraid of just about everything. It was something he was never able to really explain, just a simple fact. You can't explain it, you dolt! I think I changed that. He jumped every time he heard a loud noise, horror novels gave him nightmares, and the previous week a spider had snuck into the bathroom and gave him a panic attack that lasted 2 hours. In all honesty, he was a coward. A blubbering, twitchy coward. I am so nice to my boy! I'm just gonna keep going here. His irrational fear of everything was one of the reasons he never dared to venture outside. Oh, he had thought about going outside several times, of course. There were days when the sun was shining so beautifully, and the wind was blowing the gentlest breeze through the trees, and he almost dared to crack open the door and step into the outside world. But the fear, the simple fear that someone would see him, put those thoughts out of his mind as quickly as they came. And he would sit alone in the dark, wondering what it would be like when he finally managed to work up the courage to step out into the world. So obviously some shit has changed. In the first draft, Vector's fear vision, the thing that affects other people when they look at him, it wasn't a thing. That actually didn't become part of his whole deal until, I'd say, probably about 6 months before the comic came out. The point of him being afraid of everything here is that he just looks funky, and that's why everyone's scared of him. It wasn't a magical thing, he just looks weird, and that's why everyone was scared of him. I changed that to make it a little more believable. He sits around, and this pretty much stays the same. He sits around looking through books. Oh, and here's Ariana's intro. So he's sitting by the door, and he works up the courage to kind of like peek outside the window of the door, and he sees Ariana walking straight up. So his fingers pushed aside the curtain just enough to see a small sliver of the outside. Sunlight poured onto the floor as he pressed his eyes against the window. Again with the pressing eyes against things! No, my boy, don't do that. Opening his eyes again, the first thing he noticed was not the couples at the cafe across the street, or the color of the trees, or how brightly the sun was shining, or anything else he normally observed. The first thing he noticed was a woman, and she was walking straight towards the front door. Dun dun dun, chapter 2! Vector's first reaction was to panic. His second reaction was to run shrieking through the shop and take shelter in the back room. He just managed to accomplish both of these things before hearing the front door swing open. He wasn't sure what to think at first. Was she a robber? A criminal? A burglar? How did she get in so easily? You work in a store, dumbass! She's a customer! God. Miss Jacobs must have forgotten to lock the door. Now what was he supposed to do? Besides hyperventilate, he was already doing that. I was so proud, you guys. I was so happy with how I was writing this. He thought through his options. Miss Jacobs had told him that if anyone ever tried to break in, he should hide in the secret room underneath the floorboards. I think I put up a vote incentive for this, like when the comic was first coming out, and it was a diagram of Vector's room, and I hinted that there was a trap door in the floor. And the idea was that whenever someone came to the shop, in order to avoid being seen, Vector would have to go down into that trap door and pretty much chill there until the shop was empty again. And so whenever someone came by, it's like, hey, we've had rumors of people seeing weird shit in your house. Miss Jacobs could be like, nope, no weird shit here, just me in my house. So Ariana calls out to him. Vector was suddenly very confused. Did burglars usually say hello? She's a customer, you dumbass! Of all the things he could have done and all the things he thought of doing, Vector did the worst thing he could have possibly done at that very moment. He answered, no! Oh my boy, you are not smart. So yeah, basically he then screams at Ariana from the back room, tries to cover his ass. This is pretty much exactly how the first chapter of the comic plays out. Almost verbatim, like nothing has changed. This is pretty much the exact same, but with just more words, because I didn't have to draw it. He freaks out for like 4 paragraphs. Oh, here's where we describe Ariana for the first time. I have no idea what this is going to be. Let's read this. In the front room of the bookshop, the young woman paced the floor, examining the various shelves lining the walls. She was astounded by how many books fit in such a small building, and took care not to trip over the various piles of literature on the floor. Her straight, golden blonde hair fell past her shoulders and ended around her mid-back. Straight-cut bangs framed her face, and a silver headband sat atop her head. She had a fair complexion, thick eyelashes, and pale blue, almost violet eyes. Her clothes were simple, a long-sleeved maroon turtleneck and pants of the same color. Ariana basically just had like a maroon bodysuit, and you can see this in the first version of the comic. Girl had no fashion sense. Still doesn't, but her shirt and her pants were the same color, and it was horrible. A thin chain around her neck supported a round red jewel that was just large enough to fit snugly in her palm. She turned to face the mysterious shopkeeper who had finally made his appearance in the doorway and gasped. And now we switch back to Vector's point of view. Boy puts on like a helmet and he like hobbles towards her and she's just like, what the fuck? And he's like, what the fuck am I doing? As he made his way towards the shelf where the books were located, he glanced over to get a better look at the mysterious woman. That was his first mistake. What did you do, boy? The large helmet had significantly narrowed his field of vision, especially vertically. While he could see the woman's face and the top half of her torso from the slits in the metal, the floor was completely obscured. By the time he realized his foot had collided with a large pile of books laying on the floor, he was already halfway to the floor. So the boy trips, and his helmet falls off. And then he locks eyes with Ariana. She had seen his face. This is it, he thought. I'm dead. There was silence for a good several moments before Vector snapped out of his trance. He reeled backwards and scooted as far away as he could, screaming the entire way and knocking over several book piles. So, at this point, I have not explained shit about why this boy would be scared. And, like, I don't in the comic either, but I feel like this version, we see into his mind a little better because it's a novel. And he's kind of the person of interest, and it's just like, what? Who would read this? So again, this takes pretty heavily from the original draft of the comic where Ariana is significantly less snarky. So she doesn't like do anything to him. She's just like, what are you? Let's see here. Whoever this woman was, she was very to the point. Oh ho ho, you fools have not seen to the point yet. She didn't waste words. Vector wasn't sure what to think of that. Well, I mean, normally when people see me, they freak out. They think I'm some kind of demon or something weird like that, I guess. Or, well, that's what I'm told, Vector said nervously. His eyes darted back and forth nervously. Good job! Using the same word twice. As though he was still trying to look for an escape route. Well, I'm not going to try to kill you. I'm just here to buy a book. You can trust me. Yeah, you can trust her! She's definitely not gonna come back and kidnap your ass later. Alright, so then it pretty much just goes exactly the same way as it did in the comic. She's looking for a book on magic, specifically on tracking spells. He goes looking around. So this is the problem with the first version of the story. He basically just like spills his entire life story to her without being hardly prompted at all. And then look at all this exposition. Look at all this exposition. Look at all of it. Okay, this is like a whole fucking paragraph of him just talking about himself. So he asks Ariana what her story is, and this is what she says. Oh, nothing too exciting. I don't really have a family anymore, so I just spend my time traveling. Searching for people, things. She trailed off as though she was pondering something. Not much at all, really. Her eyes met Vector's, shining with a look that was both determined and sad. She decided to change the subject. I have no idea what is going on in the mind of my girl in this version of the story. And then Miss Jacobs comes in. And then she looked up and stopped mid-sentence. An awkward silence filled the room as Jacobs stared at Ariana. Ariana stared at Jacobs. Vector nervously glanced back and forth between the two of them, and the world froze. Must have been cold. Oh dear, I'm terribly sorry about all that, miss. I hope Vector here didn't cause you any trouble. Jacobs smiled nervously, gripping the book tightly. Ariana straightened up, confused by the arrival of this strange short woman. Jacobs continued her nervous banter. I hope he didn't frighten you at all. He tends to strike fear into the hearts of men. It's tragic, really. Jacobs, what the fuck are you saying about your poor boy? Miss Jacobs, it's okay. She isn't scared of me, Vector protested as he struggled to get free of the book pile he'd landed in. Jacobs turned and glared at him, and he went silent. Oh shit, yeah, their relationship was different. Ariana stuttered as she took the book, confused by the small, stocky woman talking at a mile a minute. She got one last look at Vector before Jacob started pushing her out the door. I like how the point of view constantly switches back and forth between Vector and Ariana. That was like my one thing I could never get a handle on. Point of view. Inside the shop, Miss Jacobs was wreaking havoc. This conversation is still in the comic, but it's very different. She's not a crazy killer. She's super nice and pretty, and she... Oh, my sweet summer child. Oh, my dear sweet boy. Also, one more thing. In this draft of the story, Vector is much... No, I think I had changed that by this point. In the earlier drafts of the story, Vector and Ariana got together as a couple in the end. So there's a bit more, like, hinting towards the romantic side of things in the earlier drafts. Like that, for example. And so, oh yeah, it doesn't end with Vector getting mad. It ends with her basically just, like, grounding him and sending him to the back room. So then Vector goes to his room, and he's sad. And he sits in the dark, being sad. His first and only friend, and he'd only known her for 10 minutes. Oh, how the turntables. Oh yeah, so here's Ariana's dramatic scene. Ariana stood before a large wall covered in sheets of paper which were blowing and flapping in the wind. The hood of her cloak was pulled up over her head, casting a dark shadow over her face. But it was one poster in particular she was looking for. A wanted poster. She read off the description in her head. Male, teenager, black hair, red-brown skin, pointed ears, and glowing eyes. The first time she saw it, she didn't think much of it. But after today, she understood what it meant. For some reason or another, Vector was a wanted criminal. And so this is obviously something that has changed because they don't have pictures on his posters in the actual, like, legitimate version of the story, and there's a reason for that because I could not explain how they knew what he looked like can't go too deep into it, but hopefully you guys will understand that later. Ariana wasn't sure what to think. From her encounter with the boy earlier this morning, she figured there was no way Vector could be the person from the poster. But the descriptions matched exactly, and she figured there weren't many others out there who fit the bill. It's probably a misunderstanding or something, she thought to herself. Probably nothing big. That has to be it. After all, the poster doesn't say what he did. It could be anything. Or he could just be a very good actor, said the voice in the back of her head. So, in this, Ariana has a bit more, morality in here. So she actually questions it a little bit, but she still doesn't. Regardless, he's still wanted, and if I play my cards right, I can use this to my advantage. She took one last look at the poster before folding it and placing it in her pocket. Well, Vector, I guess I didn't need that book after all, she said to herself, because I've already found what I'm looking for. So, here's the part where Vector's emo for a while. And then Miss Jacobs comes in to apologize. Vector's mad at her. This is pretty much like exactly how it is in the first comic. And then Jacobs says that she'll go into town and try to find her so she can apologize and that he can talk to her more, maybe. And then Vector gets all excited, talking about how nice she was, even though she was just like not really being nice, she was just kind of being a person. He gets excited, he hugs her. And then she chastises him about his hair being a mess. I remember a lot of this now. She like tries to brush his hair and it's like a cute mother-son moment that I took out of the original because I didn't have time. Jacobs talks about how being old sucks. I'm trying to scroll through this slowly so if anyone actually wants to read it they can, but I'm not going to read through all of this, that would take forever. And then he talks about the book he's reading. It was a tired storyline relying on cliches and archetypal characters, but for some reason it stuck with Vector. When he grew tired of reading books on gardening or ancient sports or the human nature, he'd often come back to this one novel to relieve his boredom. In truth, the idea of an adventure had been one Vector had always been fond of, although he never dared to go exploring on his own, much less walk out the front door. So he's got like an affection for like adventure novels. He falls asleep on top of the bookshelf, and then he wakes up and Ariana's like already broken into the room. He twisted over himself slightly in an attempt to get into a sitting position, lost his balance, and toppled to the floor, landing uncomfortably on his side in a pile of paperbacks. His back ached, and spots clogged his vision, making it harder to see the already dark room. So the boy falls off a bookshelf, a trend which in this draft of the story I remember continued, where he basically just like falls off of everything. Ariana's in the room and he's like excited, but he's like, what are you back? Like this conversation is pretty much taken straight from the original comic. I was not creative at all. And now Ariana's got this creepy shit going on, like smiling ever so slightly. The red gem on her necklace was glowing just enough to cast a crimson light on her face. Oddly enough, it appears as though her eyes might have been glowing as well. So that's actually one of the reasons I decided not to go for a novel and decide to do it for a comic instead. One of several reasons. One, I'm better at drawing than I am at writing, I think. But also, there's just like such imagery in here that I wanted to draw, but I can't if it's a novel version. Oh, yeah, so this is back in the day when Ariana still had a fucking gun. She was holding a gun and she had pulled it out of thin air. Oh boy. Oh boy. Ariana had a gun for the first few drafts. I took it out because it was fucking stupid. So yeah, she shoots him. And then shit happens. So here is the end of where the original comic ended. So everything up until here has been pretty much the exact same from the first, and it's pretty close to how the first chapter plays out in the current comic. Vector and Jacobs are there, Jacobs leaves, Ariana shows up, they talk, Ariana leaves, comes back and kidnaps Vector, and then shit continues. And so now we shall look at how much has changed and how much has not changed. Just a fair warning, I may have to censor some stuff past here if we run into reveals that are spoilers, because I am pretty sure there are some. Ooh, and I wonder if Zara's gonna be in this at all. Because Zara's role in the story has changed pretty significantly from the first drafts, but I can't remember if he's in this. I guess we'll find out.